So there was a couple of people who expressed some interest in my vampire encounter story. So I'm gonna try to relate to you the best I can. I've typed it out, well, what I can remember from it, and I'll be reading partially from it during this tale, so forgive me if I mess up. My story, even though it's true, it's ongoing. At the time it started, I was obsessed with finding vampires. It was several years ago that I started doing this, but at the time that's relevant, I had just moved out of my parents' place and into my first apartment. So I was able to do strange or anything at all that I wanted to. I don't know how long I was living there, but I was on a site called Meetup. And I was notified one day that my vampiric interest had a group. So I decided to join it. The original meeting spot was a grocery store, which, because we had 4 feet of snow that year, we had to move it to an ice cream shop of all places. Yeah, 4 feet had actually collapsed the roof of the grocery store, so we couldn't use it. Anyway, so at the time, obviously being obsessed with goth and vampires and such, I decided to go in what I considered appropriate dress, thinking that maybe I'd blend in. I arrived at the ice cream shop and half slid, half walked, right into the front. I didn't see anybody that looked like me, nobody that was dressed like me, nothing, so I decided to use the facilities, the public restroom, and upon exiting the facilities, I decided to study the menu, decide if I wanted any ice cream. At the time, I was convinced that I had to act like a vampire to encounter one. So, when as I was staring at that board, I realized that no vampire would come and get ice cream, so I turned. The second that I turned, I looked up, and I saw a dark silhouette right across the parking lot. And it hit me. Maybe he was here for the vampire meetup. So I left, walked out, and I had to slow for the ice. And I had 4-inch platforms on, so I didn't really want to fall on my ass in front of this stranger. Anyway, I didn't really get a good look at him outside the shop, but as soon as we turned around to enter it, he told me, "You have to invite me in." Well, I thought that was quaint, that he had to have an invitation to a public place. I'm still laughing about it a little bit now. After I grabbed the door handle, when we were close enough, I turned and invited him in. And that's when I saw a group of women sitting at a table, just minding their own business, talking amongst themselves, and I asked them, "Are you here for the vampire meetup?" Well, I'll just call her the leader, but she said, "Yes, we are." And then she introduced herself. Now that we were inside, the fluorescent lighting had appropriately lit my companion that I had just met outside. I could see that he was a tall man, about a head taller than me. I'm about 5'6", so I'm not short. He had salt and pepper hair, and a jacket that was brown with darker speckles on it. He had sunglasses on that were blue, very beautiful type of blue, and his hair was made into this 1950s swoop style, I guess. I adored him automatically. I don't even know why. We were asked to leave the shop upon its inevitable closing. Someone piped up that there was a sandwich shop across the way and that they were going to be open for the next several hours. My companion was the first out the door because he was sitting next to it. So I tried to catch up to him, naturally. And, well, The gate I had chosen was slightly faster than most of the people in the group, but obviously slower than him. I had to half dash after him because of the slick parking lot. I didn't have very much success. But he knew we were all following, so he opened the door when he got there. I invited him in once again to the sandwich shop, and we all sat down. I don't really remember what all we were doing, but I do remember we were in the middle of introductions when we were asked to leave the ice cream shop. So we began introductions again. And this time, I'll call him Aaron, took over the meetup. He managed to scare off the leaders after they shared some intimate stories with us, and then they gave themselves an excuse. Somebody had to be picked up or something, leaving an honest-to-God vampire sitting there with 4 young girls. And nobody was older than me. In fact, they were about high school age. I don't even know how they got there because they never said. After the leader, she claimed herself to be a psychic vampire, left, we had a lot of time and, I guess, energy to talk. Eventually, we found ourselves being asked, or being reminded several times by the manager of the sandwich place that they were closing. Naturally, it was getting very, very late, and we decided at one point to get up and leave. After we left, the group of girls that I was with, or that was sitting next to me, they sort of scooted off next to the building. They started to exchange information. Being slightly strange and knowing I had to go home eventually, I walked up to them first, getting their cell phone numbers and email addresses or whatever they were interested in giving me, and I heard a voice say, "Who will take me home?" Now, naturally, this guy we'd been sitting with for like 3 hours by this time. He was talking about various things, and most of the people were completely scared of him. So, being unafraid of him at the time, which I wasn't afraid of him, I thought he was actually lying or had lifts, or the teeth I saw while he was speaking was fake or something, I decided to give him the ride. By the time that we both piled into the car, I could see in the rear mirror that these girls were clearly very shaken up, and they were worried for my safety. Brushing it off, I took the man home. All the while, after I scared him, I warned him before he got in that he'd be scared by my driving skills. And he was no different from anybody else. He was scared. After we arrived at his home, he told me to not be too loud because his attendant, another stereotype, that his attendant was home and that we couldn't wake him up. I made my way through the back door when he opened it, into the back room, through the kitchen, and into his basement apartment, where we spent the next several hours just talking and laughing about vampire films and everything like that. He pulled up Interview with a Vampire. I'd seen it, obviously. It's one of those movies that everybody's seen. It was an excuse to cuddle with him. And anyway, for what I will say is undisclosed reasons, about 2 a.m. he decided to ask me to leave. Before I left that evening, I decided that I would get his cell phone number to make sure that he would be able to contact me and I him. Obviously, if I'm gonna look for a real vampire, and I think I found one, I'm gonna do my damnedest to actually, keep in contact with this person. And it scared me. It terrified me to the bones not to be with him or anything like that, but rather that I'd let him get away. We spent the next year and a half talking on the phone. He'd call me, and we'd spend all night talking. After the year and a half was over, I stopped getting calls for 3 days, and he knew I was trying to make my way up to where his location was. He'd only given me brief hints and clues as to where he was located because he didn't want somebody to find him that had ill intentions towards him. So I found him eventually. And it took all my money, it took all the time that I had, and it took all the resources that I could muster up without calling anybody or using somebody else or their connections or anything. So I made it up to where he was. The evening that I went and knocked on his door, I was terrified. Honestly, I was absolutely terrified. But not that he'd hurt me or anything, but more like terrified that he wouldn't let me in or that he'd ask me to leave and that I'd have to. I thought maybe the 3 days of non-contact were a fluke, or perhaps more scarily, that he didn't want me. So, when I tapped on the door and he opened it, I didn't recognize him. I had no idea who the person was because he no longer had the coat on. Instead, he was simply in a pair of boxers. He invited me in and he showed me a few things about myself, which I may do in a part 2. We spent the next several months drinking each other's power, blood, him teaching me various things. And even to this day, I'm married to him. So, anyway, if you guys want to hear a part 2, let me know. Leave a like or a comment, and especially subscribe. I do gaming videos, and I only wanted to relate this tale in the style of, like, Mr. Spooky. So, anyway.
We'll leave the light on for you.
Till next time, guys. Bye-bye!